Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Betty Chen. Taiwan stands at a strategic center of a power struggle between the U.S. and China. It faces a growing energy demand, especially from its vital semiconductor industry. The country's heavy reliance on imported electricity hinders semiconductor development and overall economic growth. Last year, Economy Minister Guo Zhihui suggested importing electricity from the Philippines, stating the rate would be no more than 4 NT dollars per kilowatt hour. But is this plan viable? Joining us today are Huang Kwei-bo, National Chengchi University Department of Diplomacy Professor, and Chia-yi, National Chengchi University Department of Diplomacy Professor. A warm welcome to both of you on the show. Taiwan lacks domestic energy production and has historically relied heavily on imports. In 2023, 96.7% of its energy supply came from imports, with only 3.3% produced domestically. Economy Minister Guo Zhihui suggests developing green energy in the Philippines and transmitting it back to Taiwan via a submarine cable. So the Economy Minister believes that Philippines may be an ideal place for Taiwan to have energy cooperation because in the Philippines, it has vast land and it's very active and very eager in developing green energy, including solar and also geothermal and all kinds of different and renewable energy like wind power. So my question first go to Professor Lee. Do you think this plan of cooperating with the Philippines and then transmitting the energy back to Taiwan feasible?
Actually, I think that's a very good idea for two reasons. First, because Taiwan is a resource-poor country. As you just mentioned, Taiwan imports more than 95% of the energy resources from overseas, and we have to generate electricity domestically. And another issue is that we rely on large power plants a lot for electricity generation, such as the Taichung thermal power plant. So if something happens to the power plant, then a huge power outage may occur. Actually, this happened before. So I think it will be very good to diversify our electricity sources. So I think cooperation with the Philippines is a very good idea. And the thing is that Philippines is very rich in natural resources, especially geothermal heat. So currently, the Philippines is the world's third largest geothermal producing country. And geothermal heat is considered to be a very stable and relatively cheap renewable energy source. So I think that's a good idea. But that said, practically speaking, I think it's still very difficult, at least within the next decade, because building such a long distance undersea grids will be very expensive. So my understanding is that the construction cost for building such submarine cable will be around $1 million per kilometer. And the distance between Taiwan and the Philippines is more than 200 kilometers. So you can imagine how costly it will be. So I think consider the financial cost, it may not be so feasible, at least within the near future.
Definitely, there are pros and cons. Right. But when it comes to the Philippines, we have to know that depending on its domestic situation, because now it seems that the Philippines and Taiwan are building closer ties due to the current president, who seems to be pro the United States and due to the situation in the South China Sea. So the Philippine president is quite friendly to Taiwan at this moment. However, in the future, if there is a change in the leadership, probably things will change. So Professor Huang, how do you see the internal and the potential political impact from the Philippines? How will that affect the relationship with Taiwan?
The relationships between Taiwan and the Philippines have been mediocre, politically. But economically, yes, the economic ties between the two are so robust, not only because of the geographic proximity, but also because of the long-term exchanges between the people of the two sides. But whether or not the Philippine government has had closer relations with Taiwan, I am not quite sure. Because to my best knowledge, actually the Philippine government has also imposed quite a few restrictions on its official exchanges with the Republic of China government and officials. Okay, so perhaps we have seen some goodwill or more friendly attitudes from the Philippine side in relation to the South China Sea issue. But eventually, we have to note that actually both the Republic of China and the Philippines have a lot of sovereign quarrels or disputes over the South China Sea. So my point is that yes, the Philippines might be willing to engage more proactively with Taiwan simply because of its dispute or argument with the Beijing authorities. But to the bottom of the issue, actually, I think the dispute between Taiwan and the Philippines are still there, and it's very difficult to solve. And also, we look at the Philippine presidents since the year of 2000. You have seen a dramatic change in attitude towards the United States and towards the Beijing authorities. For example, the first president of the new century, Arroyo, she was believed to begin to lean more towards the Beijing authorities, especially in her later term. And the second president is Aquino III, who was believed to be closer to Washington. And the ensuing president after Aquino III is Duterte, who obviously was so unwilling to speak to Washington. Rather, he would like to mingle with the Beijing authorities to exchange some mutual concerns or interests. And the incumbent president in Manila, Marcos, actually, he has been changing his attitude towards the Beijing authorities from more friendly to more hostile. So we have seen these turnovers in attitudes throughout the 4 Philippine administrations. So what would be the next? We have no clue. If history can repeat itself, then we would say, what if the Duterte families returns to power? Or what if a pro-Beijing leader is going to win the presidential election in 2028? So we have no clue. That is the risk associated with Taiwan's willingness or plan to purchase more electricity from the Philippines.
Indeed, Professor Huang, you talk about all these uncertainties when it comes to the relationship between Taiwan and the Philippines. Going back to you, Professor Lee, do you think that Taiwan's plan to purchase electricity from the Philippines will be a way for us to strengthen our bilateral relations, or what other potential benefit can come from buying electricity from the Philippines?
I think so. As Professor Huang mentioned, so the relationship between Taiwan and the Philippines is a bit lukewarm. So it's not very strong, but it's not super weak as well. So I think one good benefit that we can get from, say, if we purchase electricity from the Philippines, is that we can strengthen bilateral ties with the Philippines. And another benefit I can think of is that we can use this opportunity to strengthen the cooperation with the United States, because we know the Philippines is a strong ally with the United States. So both countries have a defense pact, right? So, and the United States has been strengthening their cooperation with countries in the Asia Pacific, especially due to the competition or even rivalry with China. So, but the cooperation between the United States and individual countries is more like bilateral. So if we build a cooperative relationship with the Philippines, I think we will have an opportunity to build a more like trilateral or even multilateral alliance, like maybe an official alliance between the United States, the Philippines, and Taiwan. So I think that will be another benefit.
Definitely, we understand that building this kind of relationship is very important for our national security, and energy security is actually also part of national security. If we look at the Philippines and actually many countries in the world, we're all very eager to develop more renewable energy. Take the Philippines as an example. They have the Philippine Energy Plan from 2023 to 2050. They aim to develop 35% of renewable energy by 2030 and 50% of renewable energy by 2040. And in Taiwan, we also have our goal for more renewable energy to achieve net zero goals. But just recently, President Trump is returning to power, and he publicly said that renewable energy is just like garbage. And he publicly said that he doesn't want to see any more new wind turbines being built on the United States, and he strongly supports clean natural gas and the traditional ways of energy. How do you view, after President Trump takes office, how will the development of renewable energy will be affected? Maybe we start with Professor Huang.
President Trump doesn't like renewable or clean energy, that's for sure. Therefore, I do not think that any business deals related to that will be interested by President Trump. But that doesn't mean that other US companies or enterprises would have no interest in that either. So I think the business between the Philippines and the relevant US enterprises would be continued. Also, I think people will look at the Philippines to invest more because of three big reasons. First, as you said, there is a clean energy project, starting from 2023 all the way to 2050. And that plan actually just started. And we had no clue whether or not it would be carried out well in the near future. But at least for the first 2 years, people have seen the resolution of the Philippines government in putting more and more money in that. And the money actually at the beginning didn't come from outside. Most of the investments, as I said, was from inside. For example, last year, the investments from the Philippine government into the new energy project or clean energy project reached almost $2 billion US dollars, which is some 87 or 88% increase in comparison with 2023. So this resolution and also the importance of new energy or green energy, as I said, is the first factor that we can see more and more Western companies, including US companies, would be willing to continue their investment. And the second reason is, of course, the land area and the sun time. The land area, unused in the Philippines is actually quite vast, so that, people can put the solar boards there in order to come up with more electricity. And sun time in the Philippines, I believe, reached on average 1,600 hours per year. So that is a very long sun time for the Philippines to generate more green energies. And the last but not least factor to explain that is the power grid. The power grids in the Philippines belong to the private citizens. Unlike the case of Taiwan, most of the power grid, or I would say all the power grids, belong to the government and the government-owned enterprises. Therefore, I think there will be more freedom for foreign companies in the Philippines to take advantage of these power grids to generate more energies for the Philippines and for the neighboring countries.
Definitely, energy is such an important issue. Due to its reliance on imported coal and natural gas, Taiwan faces the risk of an energy crisis if tensions with China escalate and the Chinese Navy blocks these imports, potentially leading to energy shortages and impacting economic activity. The Taiwanese government has been striving to address the issue of its dependence on imported energy. So we know that, according to the economy minister, Taiwan's energy import reserve only has 8 days for natural gas and 42 days for coal. So this is not too many days, right? So are the energy reserve sufficient for Taiwan to survive if a cross-strait conflict happens? Professor Lee.
I think in terms of coal, it may be okay. Like 40 days sounds okay. But in terms of natural gas, 8 days are indeed too short. And it will be very risky if a conflict happens between Taiwan and China. And ideally, the strategic reserves for natural gas should be at least 2 weeks. That will be better for countries that import natural resources. And I think that's why the government is actually planning building more LNG, liquefied natural gas terminal right now, because nowadays Taiwan has 2 LNG terminals, and the government's plan is to have 6 in the end. So I think if we are able to finish these projects and have 6 LNG terminals in the future, then it will largely increase the storage of our natural gas reserves, and that will enhance our energy security. And I think another very important strategic resource that we need to consider in terms of conflict is actually oil. Because oil consumption is very important. Oil is very important to the military because the military vehicle still needs to use oil, right? And usually oil consumption will be increasing a lot during the conflict. So I think, but in terms of this, the International Energy Agency's recommendation is that countries should have oil reserves for around 90 days, 3 months. That means if a conflict breaks out, at least you have 3 months to be prepared, right? So I think in terms of this, Taiwan's strategic oil reserves is around 100 days. So I think in terms of oil, we are okay. But in terms of natural gas, it will be a bit too short.
Thank you for your explanation, but still we understand these fuels are still important. But the thing is that just recently some incident happened. The Chinese vessels cut off the Taiwan's submarine internet cables. So some people say that that might be the beginning of the hot war. We are not so sure about that. But if in the future, say if China deploys more vessels sailing across the Taiwan Strait and blocking the fuel vessels from transporting the fuels to Taiwan, what kind of potential crisis will that happen? Professor Huang.
You know, I was chairperson of the Research and Planning Committee at the Republic of China Ministry of Foreign Affairs between 2009 and 2011. And to the end of my service at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually, we have conducted a research project on Taiwan's energy diplomacy. Because during the Ma Ying-jeou administration, we have felt such an urgency for the country to have a better energy plan, just in case there was a, say, crisis, natural or man-made. So our findings that time were, first, Taiwan was very fragile. So Taiwan needs to diversify its energy imports in order to get a safer position. And second, Taiwan needs more, as Professor Lee said, more, these oil or natural gas reserve in order to prepare for some worse scenarios. And last but not least is that Taiwan needs to find a way to conquer the possible blocking by the Beijing authorities. But we were in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and we didn't deal with the military side. So our suggestions was that, yes, we need to figure the way out for a better management of such a tension in the Taiwan Strait, but we didn't have any concrete solutions that time. So what I meant is that, Taiwan is facing some possible threats from worsening cross-strait relationships. So what can Taiwan do? Depends on its military and its political relations with the Beijing authorities. And Taiwan, as I said, has been very fragile in terms of energy supply. Therefore, Taiwan not only needs to think of a way to get some renewable energies from foreign countries, but also Taiwan needs to figure out its own clean or renewable energy supply plan during the wartime. Because right now, I think it's not very ideal for the DPP government to actually have a big delay in its new energy plan. But it might be good because such a big delay, then Taiwan has had more oil reserve or gas reserve or coal reserve. So just in case there is an armed conflict between Taiwan and mainland China, then Taiwan's slow renewable energy plan would help Taiwan in that sense.
Both of you have mentioned the fragility of the energy supply Taiwan now is facing, and nuclear is clearly an option, a very controversial option. President Lai has taken office, and actually the DPP government, or in the party platform, they want to phase out all nuclear power by 2025, which is this year. However, so far we haven't heard anything concrete mentioned by President Lai. So what's your take on the future of nuclear power? The reason why I'm mentioning this is because some people see nuclear as an indigenous source of power. We don't need to rely on the imports. How do you see the future of nuclear in Taiwan, Professor Lee?
Although the DPP government is anti-nuclear energy, I do think there's a likelihood that the government is considering extending the operation of the nuclear powers for two reasons. First, as you mentioned, nuclear energy is actually considered to be reliable, and it's quite proficient in terms of generating electricity. And it's actually considered to be clean energy because it doesn't generate that much carbon emissions. So in this sense, I think there's such a likelihood. And another reason is that the electricity consumption in Taiwan is still increasing, especially in the semiconductor industry. So like the company TSMC itself actually consumes 8% of the electricity in Taiwan, which is quite significant. So in order to meet the electricity demand, I think the government may consider extending the operation of nuclear power plants. But I think the challenge lies in the regulation, because now Taiwan has 4 nuclear power plants, but number 1 and number 2 were already decommissioned. And number 4 power plant has never been in operation. Mm-hmm. So currently only number 3 power plant is in operation. But the thing is that the license for this power plant will expire this year in May. So that's why the government is saying that in this year, they will phase out nuclear energy.
Do you think it's possible for them to extend the lifespan for the
It's likely, but I think the process will be very complex, because the thing is that the reactor in that power plant is actually the old one. So in order to extend the license, there should be some safety assessment to make sure that everything is okay. And the government may even need to amend the laws, the regulation. So I think it's possible, but it will require maybe a long-term plan or more some complicated procedure.
So talking about diversifying the energy sources, now people are saying China is actually one of the largest producers of renewable energy, and Taiwan can actually buy energy from Taiwan. So we may consider importing electricity from China. Maybe we can go through from Fujian, via Jinmen, and then back to Taiwan. Some people may say this is feasible, and some people may say this is kind of related to national security. Professor Huang, what's your take on this?
If you look at some apolitical factors, that is, the factors that are not political, then I think that would be very much feasible, because the power grid from Fujian province all the way to Kinmen, which is offshore islands of Fujian province actually, and from Jinmen or Matsu all the way to Penghu Islands and to the island of Taiwan, it's not difficult actually. On the other hand, economically, I think that is a good way for Taiwan to consider building some power grids from the Fujian province to the island of Taiwan. I mean, economically only. And also, the feasibility actually is quite high in terms of building these power linkages between the mainland China and Taiwan because of the relatively shorter distance between the islands of the mainland China. In comparison with the case of the Taiwan-Philippine power grids, actually that would be more difficult because not only from Taiwan Straits, then the power grid needs to go through other 2 straits to reach Taiwan, not to mention the black tide factors, not to mention the hurricane or typhoon factors. And also, as we have discussed, the political relations between the Philippines and mainland China. All these factors together would hinder the possibility of building power grids between Taiwan and the Philippines.
So my final question is for Professor Lee. We have talked about all these challenges Taiwan's facing when it comes to energy. How can we strengthen Taiwan's energy resilience?
I think I would say the key is to diversify, because like for any scholars who study energy, they will say diversification is the only way to strengthen energy security, unless you have abundant natural resources domestically. And for Taiwan, obviously, it's not the case. We don't have abundant natural resources at home. So I think the good thing is that we want to diversify different resources, not just different resources, and maybe different ways of electricity generation. So that's why I think importing electricity from the Philippines is still a viable option.
What
given
about
the
from
cost.
China?
From China, I agree with Professor Huang that I think economically or technically speaking, it's possible. But of course, politically, I don't think it will be feasible given the political situation in Taiwan. Even, I think, of course, under the current DPP government, it's unlikely. Even if another party, say KMT, or another party which is not so against China, is in power, I think such a plan will be opposed by the public, probably, because electricity will be considered as strategically important, right? That means if we import electricity from China, people may think one day China will have leverage. They may cut off electricity if anything happens. So I think that will be a big concern.
So again, diversification is the key word.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insights. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.